So what I want to talk to you about today is taking your idea to the next level as you begin to plan. Right? This isn't something you're probably going to do right now, but something you want to start thinking about. How are you actually going to bring this idea to market? Most of you have been talking about things in which you would use partnership largely as a way to get there. But partnership is just one channel. I'm going to talk a little bit about all the channels and also give you a little bit of an introduction to those who aren't as familiar with sales and marketing, what really happens, and what you really need to start thinking about in order to get your product to market. So to start off, I'm going to talk about innovation sales. Innovation sales, the reason I say that is it's different than doing regular sales for a product that already exists. The reason that it's different is that you need to actually have one big change, which is you're not just selling your product, you're actually trying to change someone's behavior. Because you think about it, when you bring the product to market, even if the market exists, there are customers with your competitors, you're going to want them to buy yours, not theirs. That's a change in behavior. But more even than that, most of your ideas are things that no one has ever done before. And so now you're asking someone to really change their behavior, to actually adopt something they have never done. And you're doing it with the thing called the human being, which is a very irrational animal. Just to prove my point, what I would ask you is think about your own experience. How many times have you gone out to dinner and bought yourself a really nice bottle of wine and enjoyed it and paid a lot of money for it? And the next day you found yourself complaining because they charged you $1.99 for an app on your phone. Now there's a reason we did it, right? We're maximizing our utility. But if we think about it from a dollar and cent perspective, it's not rational. Because we don't understand exactly how we all make decisions. As a matter of fact, we don't understand how we make our own decisions. Never mind, other people make our decisions. So what we need to do is we need to figure out how we can change behavior in a world in which we don't understand how decisions are made. And the best way to do that is through the scientific method, something we all learned in high school. We make a hypothesis, we test it, and we see what happens. You guys talked about that in the experimentation parts earlier. And I re-emphasized that when we talked about the questions about writing down your assumptions, writing down your risks, building experiments. The way that startup world works, because you're trying to change behavior, can only be done by testing. It's the only way to get there successfully, unless you're just dumb lucky, which would be nice, but doesn't happen too often. And matter of fact, one of the things I like to point out is a little quote by Steve Blank in the little corner here. It says, "In a startup, no facts exist inside the building, only opinions." What that also tells you is that anything you think you know, you don't. Why? Because the only opinion that matters is the customer's opinion. I mentor a lot of companies and a lot of CEOs who are trying to start their companies. And one of the first things I hear from them is, well, I believe. And when I hear that by about the third time, I will say to them, I don't care what you believe. I only care what your customers believe. So when you're going to market, what you need to do is know exactly what your customers believe and what it is they want. Now, there's a lot of ways to do this. I'm going to put for those of us who struggle through thermodynamics like I did, right? We did stocks and flows, or if you did system dynamics, you did stocks and flows. Got the same thing here. This is a stock flow diagram, real simple one for products being purchased by customers. The idea being in each of the blue boxes, we have numbers of customers or potential customers. Those numbers either have increases because things flow into them based on some actions, or decreases when things flow out of them based on actions. So the arrows are the actions that we can take. And so what we're going to do in having a model like this is figure out how we're going to go to market by putting together a series of actions, as I said, hypotheses, and then we're going to test those actions and see whether they actually work or they don't. So for example, here I have someone who's unaware of the product. This would be all of your potential customers at this point. They have no idea you exist. What action are you going to take to make them aware of your product? You can do lots of things. You could do advertising. You could send out mailings. You could go into events and speak. There's lots of activities you can take. Some are going to be effective and some aren't. What do? We hypothesize which ones we want to try, and we actually try them. And we measure the results. And measurement is really critical, right? Because when you get into doing this, there's a lot of combinations of events you can put together. This is a very oversimplified, as much as it looks complicated, series of events that marketing can take to try to get people aware of who you are. Now, to be clear, looking at that, what you see is that marketing is not one thing. For those of you who have never worked in a marketing department or seen in a marketing department, let me guarantee you that any big corporate marketing department has at least 12 or 15 branches of it where people do very different things, but all with one goal. And that goal is to actually be able to qualify a customer. And what I mean by qualify is, again, find out whose behavior we can modify to be successful. We don't want to chase everybody. We want to chase those who are likely to buy. So when I saw some of your presentations and you showed things like, you know, I think in the list you guys had the national labs, you had different utilities, you had all sorts of people, right? The reality is each one of those audiences is different. Each one is going to respond differently. Which one do you want to go after first? And the answer is you need to test and figure it out. So you use these different parts of the marketing link, right? So strategic marketing is the folks who decide what is our overall plan? How are we going to go about this? How do we want to brand our company? What do we want people to think about us? What's our image, right? You've got people who are doing market research, that is trying to actually study what the market looks like, what the peak customers are like. And when I say that, by the way, one of the mistakes that people make when they do startups often is they think about the customer as the utility. Or maybe they think about someone who might be the head of IT in the utility if they're buying a piece of software. That isn't a person. That's a job. The person is the person who is paranoid, who is worried about losing their job, who has 3 children at home, who just lost their wife 3 months ago. Right? And you start down the list. That's a person, and that's who you're selling to. And so as you start to think about these pieces, you're going to have to start to also broaden your thought about what is it who you're going to sell to. It's not the head of IT at the utility. Right? It's the person who just lost their wife with 3 kids. And that's not, and when I say that, I'm not being facetious. I mean, you are going to decide whether it's that person or it's the one who just had a new child and actually is growing their family at this time. Even though that sounds like it has nothing to do with your business, it absolutely does. Perfect example. I recently started a company that looks at basically cyber attacks, right? People trying to infiltrate your company and steal your information. One of the most important targets for me in finding the right customer was finding someone who was absolutely paranoid that they were going to get, that their boss was going to find out something about an attack before they knew it. We all know these people. Right? They have to know before anybody else, because if someone knows something they don't, they look stupid. Right? That's the person I want. I got to figure out now, how do I find, what questions do I ask when I first meet someone to figure that out? Right? Or what studies do I do to look for them? That's what market research is all about. Right? Then we want to make them go from unaware to aware. We have corporate marketing and branding. Who are we? What's our image? What's important about us? Our advertising and public relations, which is probably what we think about mostly as consumers and how we reach people. And then once you have someone who's aware, you actually try to figure out how do you actually get them into buying. Just because they're aware doesn't mean they want to buy anything. So now we start to do marketing communications. Marketing communications is the study of things like, how do I write brochures? How do I actually have people have phone conversations with that customer to find out whether or not they're likely to buy? I also have event marketing. If those of you who have ever gone to one of those conferences, right, and people are standing around in booths for hours and hours trying to convince you to buy their product. It doesn't work tremendously well, but in certain situations it can. And it's at least broad brush exposure. And then lastly, once they want to buy, I still have to go through the study of what price do I want to have? How do I want to promote the product? Do I want to give them a discount? Do I want to have a certain packaging with the product? And packaging, by the way, in the broadest sense. Your packaging may not be, even if you have a piece of software, your packaging may be actually what are all the things and services that go with it? How am I going to bundle that to provide a service? So you have to think about all these things, and rather than take too much time, I have a list of all sorts of stuff that each of them does in each part of this process. We'll just skip through that. You can read that afterwards. Okay. If you have any questions, please feel free to call me. And then we get to the part that most people think about, which is selling. How many people here have ever wanted to be a salesperson in their life? Wow. For a nuclear group, that's really large. Congratulations, thank you. I'm proud of you. That's good. What is sales? Anybody know?
Question?
Questions?
People using buzzwords.
People using buzzwords?
Like likability.
Likability, okay.
Persuasion.
Persuasion, okay. All aspects of the science of sales. But sales itself is actually the art and science of taking someone who has expressed an interest and matching that with a value so that they want to buy. At the end of the day, the really best salespeople in the world are great consultants. Because what they have to do is they have to actually talk to the customer, find out what it is they really care about, and how this solution might be able to make that better. And then work with them both to convince them, but also to conform it or configure it or change it so it works. So let me give you an example from your own presentations. You may have come back and said, I'm actually going to create this software that's going to be able to detect the dosimeters and how much the dosage they're going to get, and therefore that can go back and people can visualize it and look at it. Now, I will guarantee you when you go to talk to 3 different utilities, you'll get 3 different views of what that visualization ought to look like, and what it ought to convey, and what it really means to them. All this front part that marketing does is trying to get the list of people who are likely to buy. And now sales is trying to fit that list to the things they got to find out who they can actually get to make the purchase, whose behavior they can actually change. People traditionally talk about this as a sales funnel. And this is one of those things where you start talking about your experiments that you will want to do. Okay? Your experiments are basically trying to figure out all these numbers I have on the page. They are how many people, actually, or companies, flow from step to step to step as I move through this process based on how I've chosen to go to market. So if I have my unaware and I've chosen that I'm going to do a big branding campaign, which means I'm going to go out and talk about my company and make people familiar with my company name and how important I am and how big a company I can be and what we can do. So GE, a lot of that, right? We can associate GE with all sorts of thoughts in our head. Great brand. By doing that, they're able to get people to consider their products and move them into the aware side very, very quickly. They then do other marketing things like advertising to get them to want to buy it. Now, how do they stop it from being bought by the competitor? That's where sales comes in, right? And sales then starts to go through their own process. And their process consists of 5, there's lots of different models for this. I use this one. There's 5 different steps. You'll notice qualify, understand, invest, close, and keep. By the way, if you use the first letters, it spells quick. It's an easy way for me to remember what it is. Okay. So this is the quick sales process. And the idea of each of those steps is very basic. Qualify. What a salesperson tries to do is take what is a possible lead and figure out how they can make sure that they're someone who is likely to buy. They have a high probability. So someone had said, when I said sales, you said ask questions. This is when this really comes in, okay? The idea of qualify is what some people will call needs analysis. That is, I want to ask the customer lots of questions to understand what it is they really want. And do I have something that will fit? Because the best salesperson is going to throw away those that don't fit well. Don't even try. Now, if you're doing this with partners, as you guys are suggesting, the same model applies. It's just the partner's doing it instead of you're doing it. If you don't understand that, you're in a tough shape. You need to help them ask the right questions. Right? You need to help write a script for salespeople to be able to qualify customers who are going to buy your product. So whether you do it or you don't, you still got to be able to have that step happen. Second is understand. Understand is about a two-way street. Me understanding what and how your company makes decisions. So this is one of my favorite things in life, is like, okay, if you're going to sell to a utility, first of all, God bless you. It's one of the most painful processes in the entire world is to sell to a utility. But if you want to, let me suggest to you that you're not selling to one person. There is a person who will influence the decision because they care about what you have to say. There's a person who actually makes the decision because they have high enough authority to do so. There's a person who funds the decision who has to agree that they're going to give the money for you to be able to have that. There's also people who influence others. Their job is to run around and talk about what you do and make other people happy. And so your salesperson, if they're doing their job, is talking to all of them. If you aren't, it's what we call single-threaded, and it's a recipe for disaster. If I haven't scared you about starting a company and trying to sell, we'll get there. It's a really hard thing. You know, it was pointed out by David when he was talking about the 90-10 inverting itself. My successes are based on the fact that 90% of your time is doing this right. It's easy to come up with a good idea. It's even easy to come up with a good product. It's really hard to get someone to buy it. Now, you start hopefully by knowing what they want, so when you build it, they're likely to buy. But you still have a lot of work to do. So understanding, as I said, understand the customer. And also the customer understanding you. What is it you really have? What is the value you're going to bring to them? And that brings us to invest. Invest is really the customer's ROI. They have to save money, make more revenue, or both, based on what you have. Now sometimes it's indirect. Right? So social goods, things people buy because it's good, you know, getting rid of the CO2 and the rest of it. Those are social benefits and important. But I guarantee you every business quantifies what that means to them. They actually do. You know, SAP, we have a whole sustainability arm of the company. And every month they put out a report that says, here's what we did to cut back on all the hydrocarbons, here's what we did with it. And by the way, here's the value and stock increase value to SAP for doing that. It's being measured. It's being watched. You know, I'd love to say that we do it all just for good reasons, you know, for the people and our cultures and the future of the earth, but it's not, okay? And then we've got close, which is the process of actually getting them to sign something, and then keeping them, which often gets overlooked. So for all of your pieces that you talked about, is one of the things I would recommend to you to think about. You may have thought about some of these steps. And I'm going to talk some more about experimentation in a second, but keeping a customer is one of the most important things you can do. Keep them happy. Do it right. Do it so they buy again. Yes, the idea of the thermos all failing, so every 5 years you could resell that. Maybe, maybe not, you know. You can think about that one. There's some trade-offs in that. So now let's talk about that sales process and what actually happens. And I thought I'd actually put up, this is my last startup. This is literally what I gave each of my sales guys to say, this is how you are going to sell. Now let me assure you, the reason I got into this world is because I love working with people. I was a nuclear engineer, I went to Westinghouse, I was a nuclear fuel division, and then someone introduced me to marketing and sales, and I was out of engineering as fast as I could possibly go. Because I love trying to figure out this animal we call human, and what it does and why it does what it does. It's a very complicated one. But one of the things you find out really quickly is that you can't measure people trying to sell to other people if you don't have steps in the process that you can actually see happen. And most of the time, you won't be able to do that. If you have a partner, or you yourself are selling something, and you have a salesperson out doing it, you don't know what they're saying. You don't know what they're doing. All you're knowing are, do I get contracts or don't I get contracts? That is a nerve-wracking and difficult at best situation, because you're relying on the skill of that individual to be your entire value proposition. Everything you just talked about in your presentations, why you're doing it, what value it's for your customers, what's going to differentiate you, all the things we challenged you about, by the way, disappear in the hands of the salesperson. They're going to communicate or not communicate that. And you have nothing you can do about it. Well, except if you can write a process like this, which by the way, every salesperson will fight you and try to kill you for actually doing this. So I'll guarantee you that. Just let's get you up front. They don't want to be told what to do. But what you do is you have a laid out process that says, this is how I want you to work with the customer. I want you to go through and have an introductory presentation, and I want you to, here's the presentation that you're going to give. And then, after the presentation, I want you to go through and figure out what needs they have, and I want you to deliver a pre-work set of questions to the customer. Now, why is that one in yellow? Because the way you manage the sales process is by having deliverables. Those yellow ones are the deliverables. And what I tell my salespeople, this sounds really mean. I've managed sales most of my life. I'm actually a really nice guy when I manage sales, but I'm pretty firm with them. And I'll say, if you haven't delivered that, and I can't see an indication that it actually happened, like the customer filled it out and returned it, as far as I'm concerned, you haven't finished the qualify step. And the salesperson will tell me, and I've done this myself, so I know this is like, but I showed them the presentation. And they said it's the most exciting, incredible thing they've ever seen in their entire life. I don't want to lose the momentum by having to go through a bunch of questions with them. And so the salesperson does what every human-natured person does, which is say, they're ready to sign. I've got them so excited. And you know what? Sometimes they do. Most times they don't. And then you go, what happened? And the list of excuses is better than the ones you guys have for missing class or not doing your work. It's amazing what happens. Okay? They're very creative people. And as a result, we end up going back and trying to figure out how we can fix or save a situation. So if I had to give you one piece of advice for starting a company, this is the most important one, which is you have to have these deliverables that you can see and your salesperson can show that they are actually moving a process forward constructively. And that because of that, now I can measure. I can measure how many people got the questions, how many people answered the questions, how many people answered certain ways, how many people actually bought based on those answers. I deliver a statement of work, that's what SOW stands for, right? It says, here's everything we're gonna do, and here's everything you're gonna do. And I can get the customer to agree to that. Go to your customer after they've sort of agreed to the basic idea and say, great, based on the fact we have an agreement in principle to kind of move forward, here's the schedule of events of what I'm gonna do and you're gonna do, and the dates we're gonna do it. And what I'd like you to do is to sign the bottom to show you agree to that. Now, the reason that's very powerful is very simple. It's called commitment. I'll share with you one of my favorite stories of all time about commitment. There was a study done in which they had, just like now, an election going on. They went to 1,000 people, you know the little signs that say vote for whoever. They went to 1,000 people and said, will you put this sign on your lawn? And like 200 people out of the 1,000 said, yeah, I'll put it on my lawn. They went to another 1,000 people and they brought exactly the same thing, except the sign was the size of a billboard. They said, will you put this on your lawn? And the answer was 2 said yes. Why? I don't know, but 2 said yes. But the real story in this is what happened afterwards, which is he went back to the 200 who had the little sign and said, will you put the billboard on? And 50 of them said yes. And the answer is why they did that is pretty basic to all of us, right? How many times have we gone into the store and bought something? The guy said, oh, and it's only another $50 for this. Oh, well, I already spent that. I might as well spend another $50, right? What the heck, right? We make ourselves commit to something, and it's really hard for us emotionally to retract ourselves back and make what you would consider to be a rational decision. And so all of this process is me trying to manipulate my customer into commitment. Right? If I can get you to fill out the questions, and then I can get you to agree to the steps, and then I can get you to sign off on the dates that we're going to do this and we're going to move forward, and then I'm going to actually go in and deliver you a contract, it gets a lot harder for you not to sign that contract. But the most important part is not only that I've created the commitment, but now I have measurement points all along the process. I can see what works and what doesn't. And by the way, it also helps me understand, is what's broken my collateral? Am I saying the wrong thing? Is it because my salesperson doesn't know how to present? Is it because my contract terms are way too onerous and I'm making everybody upset, I can look at where it breaks and I can figure out what's happening. So this is the whole point of what I call the scientific approach to making a market. Now, here's where it gets to where you guys want to make some decisions. So that's all the background. I'm sure it's kind of dry and boring, but it's fun for me. But now you have choices. For example, how do you want to sell? Do you want to sell through partners? Do you want to sell through direct sales? Do you want to sell through telephones? Do you want to sell through online? How do you want to sell? And now you have all sorts of decisions to make about what to do. Again, each of these is an assumption. I can try it. But let me give you some basic guidelines as you start to think about your businesses and what you want to do. If you were trying to sell something online, you guys didn't have anything that really fits this mold. Because mostly when you sell stuff online, it's, price points like less than $2,000 and be relatively inexpensive because the customer has to decide on their own with basically very little input from anybody, no human interaction, that they're going to buy. Good news about doing things online. So I mean, maybe the folks who are doing the freemium model who wanted to give away the first part free could actually do the free part online. Try to suck people in through that mechanism. But the good thing about online is A, it doesn't have much revenue, but it has a lot of message control. And what I mean by that is what you want to communicate is on a page. Therefore, there's no way for a salesperson to screw it up, right? Because the customer's reading it. So you have absolute control of that, right? It's very inexpensive to try to do things online. And also, though, the close rates, that is how often people actually buy, is usually really small as a percentage of people who see it. So I don't think other than maybe the freemium stuff, it really doesn't fit your model. But you might want to think about it from the perspective of an entire process flow. Back when we talked about the marketing, making people aware. So for example, for the folks who were doing the freelance model piece, right? If you really wanted to, in a sense, without having to partner, sort of partner with EPRI in terms of image, do you put a landing page out there that if they go to EPRI, you say to EPRI, hey guys, we just want to put this little thing in the corner that says if you're interested in this, click here, and it brings them to this page, and now I can convey my message and capture as a way to get people to know who I am. And then maybe if they like it, there's a couple questions, or they go off to my web page, and on my web page, they can answer some basic survey points, and I can get a qualification of whether or not I really fit them or not. And maybe do an online demo, or there's a lot of things I can do to try to engage them. I can use this as part of my strategy. And I can test how many people got on the landing page, how many people clicked through from EPRI, how many people actually did it, and I can see what's working and what's not, right? And who I close. We talked about in-person as the original one. That's what most of us think about when we think about sales, right? And in-person, revenue potential is huge, right? I mean, SAP software, a typical senior salesperson in SAP software probably closes about $60 million of software a year. Some of those price tags are $10 million at a shot. So, a person can do that. By the way, what got me into and out of nuclear engineering and into sales was when I became the head of Westinghouse's Belgian sales office. It means there was one reactor I was calling on. But I closed my first deal for $60 million. Very addicting. Very addicting, right? So lots of revenue opportunity. Message control is not great because there's no way to check it, right? They're doing what they're doing, right? The cost to deliver is very high. This is the reason why we qualify leads before we give them to sales, right? I mean, a typical sales person and trying to close a deal, depends on how many calls and stuff, but I mean, it can cost $20, $40, $60, $100,000 to close. And if they don't close, it still costs you $100,000. So you really want to make sure you know what you're targeting. But their ability to close on a relative scale is very high. To give you an idea, so if you have a really good process, meaning the marketing people are doing their job really well, and you send off qualified leads to the salespeople, a really good one might close as many as a third of those. That's really high. Typically, you probably think it's more like 15%. But that's the kind of close rates you can get. And then you also have telephone sales, which might be an option for some of the other things to a degree, If not, at least another piece you can throw into it for what you guys have talked about, especially when you talk about like the software sales pieces. If you're talking about price points that maybe range from $2,000 to, even as high as maybe $20,000 or $30,000 a year, you do a lot of that on phone. Matter of fact, you want to, because it costs too much to have somebody do it in person. So phone sales is another one. Revenue, again, somewhere in between. Message control, also in between. Reason it's more controlled than the guy in the field is, when people are on telephones calling, you can listen. And big telephone centers will, and you've heard the message, your call may be recorded for, yes, it is being recorded. And it may not be for the quality of what you get. It may be for them to judge whether or not that salesperson is doing their job and delivering the message. Cost and deliver is kind of in between, and close rate's kind of in between as well. Yeah?
Sorry if I'm jumping ahead. But
That's okay.
What about the impact of these on one another? I mean, yeah, okay. So
They tend to be cascading often, right? So when we talk about that marketing piece being up front, you oftentimes will see an online component to do some of the early qualification, get people into the funnel, start to figure out whether they make sense. You may throw them off to a telesales center who then does further, talks to them, may show them the presentation. So some of the early steps in the sales process may be taken care of on phone, right? And then ultimately move to a close in person. So what'll happen is you'll tend to find, when that happens, obviously your close rate's 0 here because you're not trying to close. But you're pushing your close rate up here. So you trade off further detail, further qualification, further knowledge of the customer for some cost in doing the other pieces.
Yeah, I don't know how much this happens for larger sales deals, but I know that like when I was working at an engineering company, often the head of the company would have me look at things first because I was an intern, and so I would be doing all online because I was scared of the phone, and then I was doing phone sales, but I didn't know what we really wanted. I was just doing my best, and so there was this whole vetting process of the intern before he even got there, and I use the internet for everything, so I went and looked at all the competitors and everything. So it seems like you always have to have that. Nowadays, you always have to have that, like in some aspect. Yeah,
there's a qualification, though. Again, it depends on the sophistication of the product. So if I'm trying, if I was trying to sell, one of the companies I started was in radiology consulting. Okay? So I'm trying to talk to hospitals around the world about how their technicians should actually be doing MRIs differently than they're doing it today. Me having that conversation or an intern having that conversation would get us absolutely nowhere. Because the technician says, you're not a doctor, why the heck are you telling me how to do my job? Go away. Right? So you have to actually go almost immediately to this and say, I need a high-priced person to have the first conversation. Right? Now, I'll do a lot of awareness building, and I'll do things to try to get them maybe to call in and ask for information so I know they're interested, and that helps me on who they talk to. But I can't do some of the other work. So it depends. So this is part of your consideration as you're going through the work, and part of the things you want to test. So here's an example. So this is one I was talking about, the cybersecurity. This is actually the cybersecurity one that I just finished. Okay. So just to give you an idea how you can do this. You very quickly say, who is my beachhead customer? A beachhead means who's first. So one of my critiques would have been to the folks on the freelance side. You had like 6 different groups to go after. Pick one. Different to say how big is the market opportunity versus where I'm starting. Matter of fact, what most VCs are looking for is if you can give them a business opportunity that ultimately is in a market that may be $1 billion, they only want to see you go after a company or a market that's 50 million to get started. Pick and subset down, because then you can focus. And you can learn much faster through this process. Okay? So if I look at the freelance one, I say, figure out who's your 50 million, pick one, and then target and try it. And by the way, the idea that, well, but it works for so many other things. And what if I don't know? And shouldn't I try it all and see what happens? No. Bad idea. Good idea, pick one. One of my favorite examples for people when they're doing this is I say, hey, is it easier to prove cats don't like water or animals mostly like water? If you can figure out how to prove the second one, let me know. But that's kind of like going after everything. If I pick cats, the cats don't like water, I just throw a cat in and I see what happens. Right? And by the way, we all did science and math and physics for these degrees we're after, right? At the end of the day, we can't prove a hypothesis true. We can only prove it false, right? Pick one, try it, see what happens. If you can't prove it's false, might be true. Well, no, might be. You try. So my beachhead customer, as you can see, we talked about a little bit. So yeah, financial services, current customer, experiencing recent problems, losing control of their environment, paranoid about it, right? Searching the web to try to figure out what they're doing, doesn't have fully compliant frameworks inside their company. As you see, I'm describing a person so I can find them. This is who I want to find. And then I've got these very basic steps. Generate the lead, qualify the lead, close the lead. How am I going to do it? And I make a hypothesis. Then once I make the hypothesis, I start putting together my experiments and tests, which looks something like this. You can't read it, it's okay. This is what you end up doing. To go to market, you say, there's all these things that are going to happen. And there's all these things I got to test just to make, whoops, sorry, lost the full screen. Lost my pressure there.
F5.
There it is. All right. There we go. To make this process work. Okay. So I've got to go through and write every one of these experiments. This is literally the list I was using. Okay. I know it looks like a lot. It is. But you don't make your first billion-dollar company by not doing a little work. That's what I expect from all of you. So you make the list, my risks, my assumptions, and then I put together my experiment list, and then I actually make myself write down what would be a successful outcome versus a failed outcome based on the hypothesis. And some of these tests, by the way, are not hard. So for example, if I say, I want to know whether or not customers have a specific pain, maybe in the dosimeter one, right? Do they really care that they're able to real-time centralize the information about dosimeters? That's an assumption. I don't know that. I think they want to, but I don't know. Again, we don't know anything. Only customers know. So how am I going to actually prove that? Ask them. Go do 20 interviews. But don't show them any products. Just talk to them about dosimeters and the measurements, and what do they do with them today? And what would they like to be able to do with them? And I'll give you my magical, famous, and most appropriate question I ever use with customers. I use it every single time. It's the best one I have. So it is, if you had a magic wand and could do anything, even if it's not physically possible, what would you do to solve, insert your problem? The reason you ask that question is because if you show people product or you talk to them about your concept, they're going to tell you, that's really cool. I think that's really interesting. They're not lying to you because what you guys have is really cool and really interesting. But in the list of 4,000 things they have to do every day, where does it fit? Unless it's one of the first three, you all have just heard a really nice, sorry, but I don't care. It's interesting, not compelling. When I ask the question about magic wands, I take away all the limitations. You could tell me anything you want. I didn't say, it says physically it doesn't have to be real. What happens? They tell you the one thing they really care about. And now, can you attach what you learned to what you're doing? So, matter of fact, the vast majority of these experiments are short, they're quick, they're easy. When you see them, you'll go, oh, it wasn't that hard, it was an A/B test, or it was an interview question, or it was, okay, so I'm gonna go talk to some people. You should do that anyway, you really should. But here's the most important slide, which I'll end with. Billy Dawn. Anybody ever heard of Billy Dawn's ass? Great story, right? So the ass is equally hungry and thirsty. And it selects to go based on what's closer to it. And so some really sick-minded person decides to put the ass exactly halfway between the water and the food. And what does the ass do? It dies of both thirst and hunger. Because it can't decide what to do. Right? And I say this to everybody who starts a company. First of all, don't be the ass. Right? Make a decision. And the way you make a decision is by not having to make a decision. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but what I'm telling you the whole time is make an assumption. If your teams are arguing about this is the right direction or the wrong direction, you're arguing about the wrong thing. Because people disagree because we have basically different underlying assumptions about what's going to happen or what exists. So don't argue about the decision. Come out and say, well, here's my assumption. And someone else says, here's my assumption. Great. Pick one and test it. What's the worst that can happen? It fails, and then we go try the other person's assumption, right? And we don't have to argue. We can just get it out there. So, if anything, again, don't be the ass. Be decisive. Use the scientific method. Get the assumption out. Write the experiment. Test it. And by that, you'll figure out what all these pieces are. Going to market is no different than building a product. It's just the animal we're managing is human. Right? And so we need to write our experiments to manage the human animal. Get them through each of the steps. Write your assumption. Measure the success. See how it's going. Because then you can say, if I change my message, what happens? Does it get better? Does it get worse? I've actually got facts to work with. It's an interesting thing. Right? Especially in this world where we're in business where we don't have any facts with which to work. So, I know that's another preachy high-level discussion about how to do this stuff. But I hope it helps you, gives you a couple of thoughts about how to think about what you're doing, how to put it in a little different context. Because what you guys are doing is exciting as hell. Right? I mean, I still, at the end of the day, still have my roots in nuclear, even if I'm very, very far removed from it now. You know, and I've been doing mostly machine learning and predictive analytics, and so the people who are doing the stuff with analysis of data, I'd be glad to talk to you about what you can do there and what you can't. But there's a lot that means a lot to me here in what you're doing. And I think you can make it work. But you got to go through the process, and you got to go through the hard work of writing down all of these assumptions and testing them out and getting them right. And I saw a question back there.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's ever harmful to reveal, like, we plan to test this prototype here, or if it's better to kind of maybe skirt around that and present a product as if it's existing already.
Wait, you have something new? Yeah, so let me tell you how I do it. I'm not saying there's more than one way is the answer to your question. It depends on the situation. But in general, I follow the following process. As I said, when I talk to customers at first, I'll take all of my experiments and block them into 4 different buckets. And this is specific to talking to customers. Okay? The first bucket is questions I want to ask without showing any product or talking about. So these are the ones I want to get unprompted responses, like the magic wand question, right? Or things where I want to understand really what we always say in startups. You guys may have heard this already this week, but what we call the customer pain point. What is the customer really hurting? What do they really want someone to solve for them? And by the way, you'll know this because if you get it right, they'll always talk to you. I mean, one of the fears all of us has, is a slight digression, in all of this is getting on the phone and asking the customer to talk to us. You say, all of us are scared to death of rejection. We don't like it. But let me assure you, it's like going in front of, if you ever stood at the bus stop, a little test for yourself. If you said, God, my experience at the DMV really sucked. How many people sitting at that bus stop joined into that conversation? Everybody, because you have a pain point. There's a real pain there, right? Same thing happens with customers. If you really talk about something they care about, they'll want to talk to you. They'll want to tell you all of their woes and everything that's ever happened wrong. So it's not a question of being rejected. It's about a question of, can I find the person who cares about this problem? And there's a whole art about how you do that, and we can talk about that offline. But that's one set of questions. What I do is then I take everybody who's in that first group and I say, by the way, I've been talking to other people about this same problem. Would you be interested to see what other people are doing to help address this problem today? Because one of the questions I will ask them is, what do you do today to try to get around this, right? Now, if you really care, do you want to know what other people are doing? Hell yeah. Right? I haven't solved the problem. It hurts. Yeah, tell me what to do, right? Do I need to take this medication? What do I need to do? Right? So you get them to the second step. The second step is then I will talk to them about, based on listening to you, so I think this is more to your question, I think there might be a solution here, and we'd like to explore that a little. And so here's an outline, literally an outline. What I do is I tend to do like hand-drawn, never like PowerPoint, hand-drawn stuff and little notes. And the reason is because then the customer feels like they can draw on it and change it. The minute it's a PowerPoint, it's finished. We don't touch it. No. Right? Very unfinished. And then you go back to those people and you say, and then you go and you say, now that we've had this second discussion, I've talked to all these people, I actually think we have an idea for a new product we're thinking about bringing to market. Not sure yet, but we think we might. Would you like to see it? Okay, right? You show them the product. Right? And now is the first time you can show them sort of, maybe PowerPoints or HTML screens if you're doing software, or real design brochures if you've got other things, and you show them. This is the idea, feature, function, what we're thinking about. By the way, if you like it, would you like to sign up for the beta? And try it, no cost, just try it. Boom, right? Give you a concrete example of how that works. I just did this again with this one I started for the encryption stuff. We had 17 customers that I went and just did general interviews with, didn't show them any product. Of the 17, 16 wanted to see what everybody else had to say. Of the 16 that everyone wanted to say, 14 of them were willing to go look at the product and tell them what they thought about it. And of the 14 who were willing to look at it, 13 actually signed up for the beta. So I had 17 people I talked to, 13 signing up for betas. That's a high hit rate. So the reason I give you the long-winded story is, the answer to your question is, you do tell them, but you kind of do it in a process. Again, commitment, right? Keep them engaged, give them value back. But don't tell them you're building a product until you get to the point where you're ready to build a product.
So I really like the idea of the step method, especially coming, as an engineer. But it feels almost like it conflicts with what we've been taught about making investment presentations and how they have to be really quick. And it's like, you get this time to make your impression. So we're talking about sales of a product to somebody buying. Yeah. So when the product is your ability to sell something, how do you sell that in one presentation?
So the notion, again, separating investor from customer, even though they're different customers, right? The idea of working with what I call the real customer, that's someone who actually pays me, is about trying to get it right, right? You're trying to follow a process. And by the way, this doesn't mean it takes a lot of time. For the time to set up the first 17 interviews took me like 2 weeks. And to get the 17 interviews into the 13 betas took me another week and a half. So we're talking about 3.5 weeks to get people ready to use your product. Not very long. But the point is, what I don't confuse that with what happens to the investor. What happens to the investor is actually a digestion of all of that, what happens with the customer. I will make a very strong statement, and as I do in most things in life, so you can take it for what it's worth. But in my opinion, when you go to an investor, what you're selling is your knowledge of what the customer wants, period. So when I get questions from investors about my company, most of the time the question is about, so exactly, why did you put that feature in? What do you think that's going to do? And why do you? And the answer is, well, I talked to the 17 people, and here's what they said. Now, once I say that, who's the expert in the room? There's only one who knows what the customer said, because I was sitting in front of him. Right? And that's really important, because what investors often try to do is they want to take control of the meeting to do what they want to do. By doing that, I keep control of the meeting, and I do what I want to do, which is talk about my real knowledge and my asset, which is my customer and my experiments. So the customers, the experiments, the things you do get lined up so that when you go to the investor, you can do a 2-minute pitch that basically says, here's what I know. And like I told you before, when I said the best thing you can do is ask you how. The best thing that you ask me about is, why did you decide to do that? I'm now not only the expert on the technology, I'm the expert on the customer, I'm the expert on the market, right? Go ahead, ask me what you want. I want you to go there. So I don't have to spend 30 minutes describing it. Do it very quickly.
I've got a question. So whatever we're going to call them, the gatekeepers, the decision makers, whatever they are, in our industry we've got a bit of a big gobbler on the hill there called the regulator, and that's unique. Not entirely unique, but it's particularly like teethy regulator.
Yeah.
Got any tips for circumnavigating?
Yeah, the answer is I treat them as just another piece of the customer decision process. So I will go and do experiments with them too. I'll do interviews, trying to find out specific things. Where do they sit? What do they think? How does this process bother them? Right? So if you go to the NRC, you say, hey, guys, tell me about what part of this process really hurts for you. And how does that align with what I'm trying to accomplish here? Can I actually help you solve your problem at the same time I'm helping the customer solve their problem? Or at least not make it any worse, right? So I use an abbreviation as DMU, Decision Making Unit. That's part of the decision making unit for my product. Because I can't ignore it. I started a couple healthcare companies, getting the Food and Drug Administration or others to approve is pretty important. So you work with them. They're part of the process. You don't ignore them, right? And you don't assume. Again, we only put assumptions down so we can test them. We don't assume to ever get anywhere.